Okay, hey there, true believers. I get to have Amber Bowden Vance from TikTok on here, one of my monster friends. So, uh, Amber, so what's been going on with you?
Not too much. I will correct you right there, though. It's Amber Bowden Vance.
Oh, Amber Bowden. I don't want to get that wrong.
Yeah, I do know some Bowdens, though. So that's an easy mix up.
All right. Well, as long as I'm, forgiven on that one, I think we'll do
Oh,
okay.
for sure. For sure. I mispronounce things regularly.
So let's talk about you a little bit. So you got started on TikTok. So how did that happen?
Yeah. It actually happened kind of by accident. I was at home on maternity leave with my daughter, and I was just kind of bored. And so I had a TikTok anyway, and I would just kind of post silly things here and there. And I just started posting random things. And I think originally it was the silliest video ever. I was in a bathrobe, I had no makeup on, and I just stitched a random video with this girl talking about doppelgangers. And I was like, hey, I know something about doppelgangers. And proceeded to tell this story about this guy who told me something about doppelgangers. And it got like over 1 million views and
Wow.
blew my mind. I'd never had anything hit that big. And so then I just started telling more stories. And then it started telling Arkansas stories, and those took off. And so I started telling more like random stories that I'd collected from all over the United States because I've always had an interest in strange phenomenon. So I had collected a bunch of
Hmm.
them and I just started sharing them. People liked them, so I kept doing it.
Okay. Yeah, it's been really interesting. That's how you and I got introduced. My
Yes.
my son got a hold of you, and he was like, "Hey, you might get a kick out of Dad's group." So
Yeah,
you came in, hung out with us, and we've been having fun ever since.
we have. I love the group. I love how easy the discussions are and everybody's open minded and nobody jumps down each other's throat or, tries to tell them they're stupid, which I feel like people get
Yeah.
a lot of, especially when they're just learning and just, getting introduced to ideas. And I love that about this group.
Well,
Everybody's
we are.
very open.
Yeah, we are a relatively small group still yet, so I'm pretty strict on weeding out, the people who are the real trolls and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, we
The
try and
ones that
keep it
just want
fun.
to
I don't want
pick
to.
on people.
Yeah, I don't play that game, homie. Don't play that.
Right.
So tell us about you instead of the TikTok. How did you get into this whole interest of weird stuff?
I actually feel like I was born into it. I didn't really have a choice. So my parents were hippies, really, is how that started. But my mom has always been very, very spiritual in a way. And so she collected crystals and rocks from all over. So my house was always covered in crystals. And she was just very open about a lot of things. Like I grew up with a mother that wanted to, she saw a hole in a tree. She wanted to leave a crystal in there because she said it was a fairy hole. So there was magic in the world to me growing up, always. And then my mom, I don't know how old I was when this happened actually, but she randomly ran across this lady who was doing a psychic fair, and I was still very young. And then my mom started going to the psychic fairs and then eventually doing the psychic fairs with all of her rocks and stones. And I was just a little kid. So I'm a little kid running around in these psychic fairs growing up. So I was exposed to a lot of different ideas and systems and belief systems, like very, very young. It was very normal to me. And then my mom's hobby became the Stone Maiden eventually as I got older, where she, has her little stone store in North Little Rock in Arkansas and sells all the crystals and the stones and whatever. And her and my dad, actually, when I was a kid, they would go digging all over Arkansas for the crystals and the stones. And that was their idea of date night. So it would be one of those, all right, kids, we're gonna have a date night this weekend, which means we're going out of town and we're gonna be in a mud hole for 2 days. And if you can't get a hold of us, like it's because we're in the middle of nowhere digging rocks. So I had very interesting parents that made it very easy for me to be interested in strange things.
Excellent, excellent. Oh well, I'm glad you had hippie parents and
Yes,
sent you down that path.
for sure.
Um,
And,
we'll
I
switch
also
back
grew up
to
in a church. being below the Bible Belt, my mom still went to church and stuff. So I was also exposed to regular religion and, church camps and whatnot. So my mom is always like very spiritual, but she's also very Christian based. My dad was not. So I feel like I also got a really good line of being exposed to religions, but also being a step back from them too. And I think that helped as well.
I think so. For anybody listening, if it happens to sound like we're stepping all over each other, I'm having some lag issues here. So for those of you that commented on the last video about how I just interrupted Ryan left and right, trust me, we didn't see it that way. It just kept happening kind of weird. So if anybody thinks I'm trying to shut Amber down, I'm totally not trying to do that.
It's also probably me interrupting. I'm not used to podcasts, guys, so be aware of that.
That's okay. That's all right. I'm on my 5th episode, so apparently I'm not very used to it either.
I love them though. I think they've been great. I listen to every single one.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We finally just today got up to 500 subscribers.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's very
exciting. I feel like that's a real milestone on YouTube.
It is. We're really close to being able to monetize it. And monetizing means a lot. That means that we can actually do some. Speaking of monetizing and TikTok, let's talk about what's been going on with legislature and TikTok. I know you've had a few TikToks where you've expressed your point of view on that.
Yes.
I'd kind of like to hear what you have to say.
I am very angry about it. I was really on one for a minute because I saw a lady say that we need to be calling out our senators because that's a way that we could draw attention to it. And I took that to heart and started calling out all the senators because I'm just so upset about it. Because one, I feel like TikTok is a very unique platform in that like just a regular person with something to say can reach millions of people like almost effortlessly. If it's important enough, if it's interesting enough, whatever. And I feel like a lot of people have found community there. I feel like they've been able to grow small businesses. People make money off of it. I do. I make money off my TikTok now. And so it's taken away income from millions of Americans, which is not cool. But it's also not cool for them to try to tell us what we can and cannot say, which I feel like more than anything is what the problem really is that they don't like how easily we are able to discuss things that has not been government approved.
Oh, I'd agree with you. 110%. I think the whole thing about, it's China and, they're trying to steal information. And I'm like, okay, so we're not going to shut down Temu. We're not going to shut down Wish. We're just going to aim it at TikTok.
And all the social media sell our data. Like, are you kidding me? It's because they can't regulate it the way they can.
But right. And you've got like Facebook, and there's a conspiracy theory that, Facebook is actually run by the NSA and the CIA anyway. So,
well, I mean, that's a pretty good conspiracy theory because they are money-wise pretty tied up together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is true. And if you think about it and you wanted people to, you wanted to be able to track where everybody is, about the easiest thing to do is tell them, hey, why don't you post what you're having for lunch, where you're at,
exactly,
who you're with, what movie you're going to see, and we'll make it part of social media.
Right.
So, yeah.
People are going to voluntarily volunteer all their information.
Exactly. So let's talk about some weird stuff. So so what are your favorite subjects when we get into the weird stuff? And we'll start breaking them down as we go along.
I honestly love all of it. I think originally what brought me into like tracking stories is that I was actually tracking like places of power. My original theory years and years and years ago was that, it was the crystals and the stones underneath certain places that could affect activity and phenomenon that happened there. And I still believe that, by the way. I still believe that there is stuff under the ground that has to do with strange phenomenon. And
I agree.
So yeah, places of power was actually my original starting point, I think. where I branched off at a lot of different places that took me to ghosts and cryptids and aliens. And then I just started collecting them from all over the United States. Like, where are they? Because I have a theory that there's a pattern to it all. It's just, outside of our knowledge at this time in humanity.
I agree. So places of power, what dictates what is a place of power?
I can't really say for sure, but I do know that, or I believe that the ancients marked a lot of them, that they knew. So easily the pyramids would be one. They're obviously something. They're aligned with the planets, which I think also could have a key part to play in where strange things happen. But I think places of power could be a bunch of different things. I think it could be good energy or bad energy. I think you could get, I think it's just anywhere that a lot of different, very odd things happen, unexplainable things, is where you can be like, this could be one. This could be one. And a lot of times, they connect to each other, like across the planet, like in the ley line theories.
Okay. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like it started with the old straight track. They run in straight lines. Right.
So, yeah, connecting places like the pyramids with Stonehenge, with the Bermuda Triangle,
right,
with other places like that.
Right, but I think it can also happen on a much smaller scale than that. I think maybe the big ones could connect, but then, like tiers of how powerful they could be. So, and I think too, so in the original ley line theory, the guy was connecting structures across England, I think is where it began. And it was like churches and stone formations, and they ran in these like straight lines that connected together. Well, I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with the structures. I think the structures are marking the land. So sometimes there might not be anything there, but that doesn't mean there's not anything there.
Maybe instead of the structures dictating where the ley lines were, the ley lines ended up dictating where the structures were.
Right. People wanted to build in places that were different, that felt spiritual somehow, or that they felt closer to whatever, God or whatever entity they're trying to reach.
Right. Sounds good to me. And you said you think that the crystals in the ground have a lot to do with it. I do too, especially quartz.
I for sure do. Yes, quartz especially is a very crazy thing when you actually stop to think about it. Like it's what is the word for it? Piezoelectric? What's the word?
I know what you're talking about. I would have known it if you hadn't asked me.
Yeah, like I don't know exactly how to say it. It's like piezoelectricity or something like that. But and it's also like pyroelectric. And there's another stone that's, I don't think it's just crystals, because there's another stone called royal shungite, and you can power a flashlight with it. Like where the battery, I guess, supposed to be, you can just kind of press it in there and it'll turn that flashlight on. Well, if you get large amounts of it under the ground, it's probably capable of some things that we're not giving it credit for.
Oh, yeah, because I don't think we understand electricity and physics and most of that as much as we like to claim we do in the first place. Oh, yeah, we have physicists out there who are still arguing about dark matter and ether and everything else. So, I mean, we obviously don't know anything yet.
Exactly. Science hasn't been... A lot of people look at it, I think, as science is absolute fact, but really science is mostly still theory. It's constantly evolving, that's what it's supposed to be anyway. It's constantly being updated with new discoveries and new understanding. So there's a lot out there that we don't understand. Our senses are very limited.
This is true. This is very true. So places of power, can you think of any places of power in our state, in Arkansas, that are pretty interesting?
I have some suspected ones. Like, I think that the Devil's Tower in Wyoming is a very powerful place. It's been held sacred for a lot of time. It feels different there. And just the Devil's Tower itself is like, what is that thing? It just kind of rises up out of the plains like crazy. There's so many legends. There's been so much. Like, it's just, I think that could be one for sure. I think there's one
Okay.
near, and this is just from theory, I can't prove any of it. I don't know. But I think there's also one along the California, like Nevada border around here-ish, near like Mount Shasta or all that. Like, I think those are probably places like that. And Thunder Bay is, I know that's not technically in the US, but Thunder Bay is another very interesting place. A lot of people just disappear, like gone, chilling in a boat. Suddenly the boat is floating by itself.
So Mount Shasta, has a whole lot of legends and folklore surrounding it. I think the Appalachians do too.
For sure.
As well as possibly the Ozarks themselves. See, guys, we're running over each other.
We're just having fun. Getting excited talking.
We're having fun. But yeah. But there's a lot of different places of power. And I'm like you, I think there's probably levels to it. I think even whenever you get into certain forests or certain places in the wilderness, each one of them has their own individual aura, if you want to, or spirit.
Yes.
It kind of dwells with it. That's when you get into something like the Leshy, where there's a powerful spirit that guards over that area. And I don't know. I know I can go into the woods in one area and I can feel at home. And then you go into another patch of woods and you're like, I'm not sure I should be here or not.
Right. And sometimes it could be the same forest, like you just started at point A and you were like, hey, I'm welcome here and everything is great. And then all of a sudden it's like you step into a different area, even though you're in the same forest. So I know exactly what you mean. Like the whole vibe changes, like the whole everything changes.
Right. Since we're hanging out in the forest and we're talking about vibes, since we're on this subject, have you ever run into an area where you experienced anything like complete terror or anything like that, or just everything fell silent?
I have. Now the silence, yes, has happened a lot, but I've never actually seen anything other than when I was a child, and it was that like that hatman phenomenon that happens to some people. That is the only time that I've felt truly terrified by, I think, anything ever.
I have a hatman story of my own, so yeah.
Hatman is that Joker does not play, but yes, and I believe wholeheartedly in that because I experienced that. But yeah, that's the only time. So outside, other than, and I don't even think I've run into an animal that scared me. But I don't hang out in the forest 24/7. So I've run into some coyotes. That's about the scariest thing in the forest I've ever run into.
Yeah, well, that can be, depending on who you are. And,
they weren't scary. They were cute.
Their attitude. That can be pretty rough. Okay, so we talked about places of power a little bit. We might circle back around to that. So mimics. Tell me about the mimic. I know that's one of your favorite subjects.
The mimic, I think that it's not necessarily that it's one of my favorites. It's one that I'm the most intrigued by. Only because the mimic, okay, I had never actually heard of a mimic until a few years ago. I had never heard anyone use that term. Mimic. So when people first started saying it, I was like, what are you talking about even? Most people, I think, when they're saying it, from what I understand now, is like the common ghostly phenomenon, like in a haunting where a ghost will mimic a voice. And I feel like that is pretty common with common hauntings. You know what I mean? Like that's something you hear a lot. And like, I have this haunted house story, or I experienced something strange of hearing your own voice calling to you or hearing someone else in your home calling your name and it's not actually them. I feel like that is pretty common. But the other part of the mimic type behavior that people say is the part that gets me, because I feel like throwing voices is something that's pretty common for some ghosts. And ghost theories are interesting anyway. They're ranging because, like I said, I feel like I approach everything in the same way in that I believe it, but I also don't always believe, like if there's I feel like I have to hold it up and believe it, but objectively know that it could also not be true at the same time. So whatever I'm talking about at any given time, there's this sense of I believe it, but I also do not believe it, depending on what we're talking about. But so ghosts in general hauntings, that's a pretty common thing. But if we start getting into like, oh, well, I was in the forest and I ran into a mimic, and this mimic put on my husband's face. Hold up. That might be something different. What do you mean? Because I feel like what I've recalled now as doppelganger behavior or doppelganger phenomenon is the way I've coined it in my head, is that like anything that can mimic physically, like other than maybe you, because you're right there. I don't know about that one, but I'm going to say you. Anything that can change its shape like that cannot be a common ghost.
Mm-hmm.
So my thing is always, what is it? Like what is the mimic phenomenon? And that is very intriguing to me, because I do feel like it's happened more recently where I've run into stories of people saying like, it's more than voices. Like there's a house in, where was it? Monticello, the Allen house, I believe, where the lady or the couple that bought it, one of the ghosts in the house kept appearing as their son. I think that's the house. I think that I'm saying the right house. I think this is the right story.
I think you are too. That sounds familiar.
Kept appearing as the son. And I'm like, that's not a common ghost. If they can copy your child's form and is like, that's doppelganger activity. That's something more than a common ghost. I don't know what it is though. So that's the part that I love so much about it, of the, what is it? What is it? So yes, I love these topics, but I don't have an answer to these topics.
Well, I don't think any of us actually have an answer to it. I think when we get into what we call the mimic and the doppelganger, we're getting more into what I term the other, where we're looking more at the fae, the trolls, something beyond our understanding. And I think that there's a lot of cases where we call a haunting and call it ghosts, where that's not actually what's going on. There's something going on with the other. Yeah. Yes. Especially when you get into sections. I'm sorry. When you get into sections where you got people doing like, where they're going through old buildings and stuff. Yes. Like that, urban exploration, and they run into something. I was always aware of an old story that said if a building stands for 3 years without anyone living in it, something else will take up residence in it.
I've never heard that, but I love it.
That these things have probably moved in.
I love that. 3 years.
But
I'm going to remember that one.
But anyway, these things will take up residence in there. And so what you're seeing as a haunting is, think about you're walking through the woods and you step in front of a rattlesnake and it rattles. Or, a dog or a wolf or something that's in a den, it'll growl. It's trying to warn you out of there. You're now in its territory and it wants you gone. It doesn't want anything to do with you. So it knowing what scares us, it's able to do something like that. Slam doors, throw bricks, throw your voice, throw somebody else's voice, sound angry, growl, whatever it has to do to make you go away. And 9 times out of 10, it works until you get a weirdo like me or you who ends up in there.
That is like, do it again. Do it again. So the other thing that you were saying is, I agree with that completely. I don't know what the others are. I did start for a while saying, as a way to explain it to myself easily, of that the doppelganger behavior was like jinn behavior. Because are you familiar with the lore of the jinn? Yes. Yeah, well, they're shapeshifters and they were created parallel to humans, and they're not immortal necessarily, but they're not an angel and they're not a demon, but something similar to that, and so they have powers that we don't have. They exist outside of our perception most of the time, and they kind of do their own thing. But if they want to mess with humans, they can. Like there's cases of jinn having babies with human beings, and these human beings come out different. And that's very much like a lot of the fairy legends, in Europe of the fae can come out and do whatever they want. They can be dangerous, but they can also be helpful. They can hurt a human, but they can also befriend a human. It depends on the individual entity. Just like human beings, they're going to be their own person with their own whatever. But it said that jinn hang out in these they like to be away from human beings, so you find them in the deserts or in the forests or in caves. But some of them like human beings. They like to observe them, especially the ones that are generally more helpful anyway. I'm not going to say helpful, okay, because these would be creatures that are superior to us and know it type things. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't say ever try to go befriend one necessarily, but not all of them are just malicious, just to be malicious. But you can get them in like abandoned warehouses or in places that are kind of far out, but not too far out because they still like to be around. But I agree with that of like, if you wander into their territory, they might start rattling everything. They might appear as your, long lost brother just to scare the bejesus out of you so that you never come back. Because they're like, I like it here. I don't want to leave again.
Yep. And when you get into the folklore of the Jinn, it's really a lot like with the Fae and the Trolls, where there's kind of a mixing and a blending of their lore, ghosts, angels, demons. It all kind of blends together. So
I like the way you put it, the others. That's a better way than just saying like, because I would say Jinn to myself in order to express what you're saying with others. Because, I'm like, I don't know that it's this category in different, because I think all the folklores are true in one way or another. And where they match up is always very notable to me, because that means, okay, these are two different places, two different cultures, two different peoples that may have existed at two different times that had the exact same creature. So that's notable.
Yep. You're like me. You're looking for those common denominators that keep popping up, where like iron, silver, different metals keep popping up as far as that. Disturbing the ground seems to be an interesting one. We're seeing that with like the Skinwalker Ranch thing. Like with Skinwalker Ranch, they really brought into the whole deal about disturbing the ground. And I think there's something to that. I really do. I'm not sure quite what it is. And I don't know how much validity I put into the show of Skinwalker Ranch. But I kind of wonder if they didn't accidentally stumble onto something with that, because I really see that there might be some validity.
I think there is. I think some of that, some of that activity that's gone on there has gone on long before they started filming it for the show. And I don't think the people that lived there before the show started made it up. And a lot of it's pretty widely talked about. So I think they have something there. And I definitely agree with that whole like disturbing the ground, because that also happens with a lot of haunted houses. I've noticed is that like the house was fine, and then all of a sudden people started swearing it was haunted as they were renovating it, or as they were building this other wing, or like it woke it up. I definitely think there's something to the disturbing it. I also wonder about the metal, like iron, of so many haunted railroad tracks. Why are there so many haunted railroad tracks? So I've wondered if it doesn't have something to do with the tracks themselves. Like, is it holding energy there? Is energy attracted to it? Is it, and also bridges, and a lot of the bridges are made with iron. So is there something in the iron that's attracting that activity, or is it more because it's a transitional space, like the liminal space theory? I don't know, but I've wondered a lot about the metal, about if it's not the iron.
That's an interesting thing I'll have to keep in mind, especially with liminal spaces. That's one of my favorites there as of late. Yeah, liminal spaces and all those weird things like bridges, I don't know why, but it made me think of, whenever I think of bridges, I always think of trolls living under the bridges. So, that falls back upon itself where you start talking about stuff like that. So,
and the bridges, it's kind of like the ghost lights on the railroad tracks. There are so many. And the crybaby bridges. Every state has a crybaby bridge. Every single one. Oh, yeah. And almost all of the stories are exactly the same in some variation. You get about 4 different versions, all with the mama and the baby. But they're almost all the same. So at first I was like, okay, I bet there's an original crybaby bridge somewhere. And the stories just got copied off each other. But I don't believe that anymore. I think now there's something to it. I don't know why it happens at bridges. I don't know why it's the same phenomenon. I don't know. But there is. I think there's a common denominator.
I think so too. That's kind of like the whole thing with La Llorona. You
Yes.
would think that that would only occur around the river where she supposedly did all of this. But no, we've
Mm-hmm.
now got La Llorona wherever there are people of Mexican or Hispanic descent.
Yes.
So,
And she's,
you know,
yeah, she spans countries.
yeah. I mean, all over the place. But that falls back on the woman in white. So
Right.
there's all of that goes on, which
That's
is
another one
it's
that always gets
interesting
me
stuff.
too. Yeah, with the ghost lights on the railroad tracks and the crybaby bridges and the women in white. You get them and the phantom hitchhikers. Those are four that you can count on
Hmm.
everywhere. They're universal experiences. But why does that happen? I don't know.
You know, I think it's more of what we expect to be there. Maybe we shape what our monsters are without actually allowing them to be whatever they actually are. They take on a persona because they know, oh, you know, somebody's scared of that, so I can use that to keep them away from here. It's not
Right.
necessarily that's what the creature is in the first place. It's just hey, it works. Why not do it?
Right. That's a good point too. It's also the idea of the thought forms. What is that word? It starts with the E and egregore. Is that right? I think so. Where like
That's one form of it. Yeah.
where like a thought form is born from group belief,
Hmm.
collective belief in it.
Hmm. Yeah. I think there's several different versions of it. There's the Buddhist one, and why I don't know, but I have completely lost the name in my head right now. We were talking about it on the group the other day. But yeah, you know, there was actually a couple of experiments. I think one was the Peterson experiment in the paranormal community years ago, and they went into a house that had no activity. It was not haunted at all, but they told everybody in the experiment that it was, and then they started to get activity,
Mm.
but they figured out it's because they created this to happen.
Yeah, the human mind is powerful. I think we create a lot of our
Yep.
experiences without realizing that we do it.
I think so too. And I think we block a lot of experiences without realizing that we do it too. I think whenever we're
Agreed.
kids, we're far more susceptible to the world that's around us, and then we start to shut ourselves down from it. And we need to try
Absolutely.
and learn to open ourselves back up to it. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely agree. And these two things kind of remind me of so I mentioned to you the other day, I fell down a rabbit hole about a legend called Walking Sam. And have you ever heard of Walking Sam before?
Yes. And I double checked and I looked it up yesterday after you told me about that, just to
Yes,
remind myself about it. And that's a really interesting one.
a very interesting one. And I had never heard of Walking Sam before because a lot of the stories that I do now, for TikTok, people tell me to look into things. So I have a giant clipboard list at this point of all the different things that people have told me to look into. And so that one just came up on my list. I'm like, okay, we're going to do Walking Sam. And I started learning about it. And I was like, do you know who this reminds me of? Initial thought, Slender Man, right? Does it not sound exactly like
Mm-hmm.
Slender Man? And so I'm like, I know Slender Man was created in
Yes.
like 2009 on Creepypasta, right? Was that its original source?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And
Yep.
and I'm like, I wonder if Walking Sam was the initial inspiration for that because he's described almost exactly the same way. The tall, skinny, like stick-like figure, except Walking Sam has the hat, where Slenderman didn't have a hat. He just had his suit or whatever.
Mm.
And Slenderman didn't have a face, but Walking Sam has eyes, but no face. But what I found really interesting about Walking Sam, I think, and the whole reason, and I guess for people that don't know, Walking Sam is like he follows people that have depression because he's like a suicide spirit. He's the spirit of suicide. And encourages people to I don't want you to get in trouble. I'm not sure the words I can say on here.
I know what you mean. I think everybody knows
Yes,
what you mean.
encourages people to commit bad acts against themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And but he's kind of described always as the stick figure with the hat, but as a shadow person. And in different tribes, they called him either Walking Sam or the Tall Man or the Stovetop Hat Man, which immediately
Mm-hmm.
pushed me to the Hat Man. And also about Walking Sam is that he tends to target young people, children and teenagers, mostly no one over 22, 23, 24. And I think it's because they're more open. And that's kind of part of it too, is that they can't block it out as easy. And Walking Sam whispers right into their mind about, they're worthless and they don't have anything to live for, all the things that aren't true. Because Sam is lonely is the legend to it, is that he's an entity that's been cursed to wander Earth by himself. And so he does this so he can collect souls because he's lonely and he's trying to build companions. Well, some of that kind of shadows in the Slender Man story too, of the girls saying, remember the Slender Man stabbing that happened in
Yes.
I don't remember. Was it Wisconsin? I think so. Oh,
I believe so.
Okay. Well, they said that Slender Man had a castle in the woods, and that is such a crazy story to me anyway. So I've been reading all of this stuff again. And but it's the Shadow Man thing that I think really got me, is if he's a shadow person and he's this dark spirit and that he appears to children because children are more open, that's all very Hatmanish. Like the Shadow Man, Hatman. And it just makes you wonder about a connection between the two.
Right.
Especially because I guess, experienced a Hatman situation when I was young. And now I'm all like, oh my, fell down this big thing. So now I'm like, what if, we're just what ifing, guys. What if Walking Sam and the Shadow Man Hatman is the same entity, the same creature. And he's collecting these souls, right, to turn into the shadow people. Like the shadow people that hang out with the Hatman. And I'm like,
That's
what if it's not this?
That's an interesting idea.
It's an interesting correlation, I think, between an urban legend, I guess, of the shadow people, even though the shadow people are real, y'all. That's real. But and the Walking Sam legend, I don't know, that the two things connected in a way that definitely has intrigued me very much.
Yes, definitely. So now you kind of opened the door for this. So you mentioned Hatman and that you had an experience with Hatman. So now everybody wants to hear what is
the experience with Hatman?
Experience with Hatman.
Yeah, I can tell you. I mean, I feel like it's a lot like everyone's experience. Who I didn't realize either until this became a thing on the internet, of how many people saw this Hatman entity as a child. I had no idea that so many people had. But when I was a kid, I don't even really know where it started, because there were a few things that happened all together. But I woke up, and I don't have an age anymore for I have no context for how old I was. I know I wasn't a super small child, but I was not yet like a older child. So somewhere right in the middle of kidhood. But I woke up and there's this man standing, a shadow, and I always slept with my door open. So, because I was a scaredy cat and I needed the light, so I could see his outline and I could tell that he had eyes and that he was looking at me. And all I could really see was the outline of the hat. But I was frozen. When I say, I have never, as a child or an adult, felt the absolute terror that I felt. I was paralyzed. I couldn't scream for help. I couldn't call out for my mom. And I kept thinking to myself that my parents were right there on the other side of that wall, and I can't move. There is a man in my room. I don't know why he looks like a shadow, but I know for sure he's trying to get me, and I can't even call for my mama because I'm frozen solid, and I was terrified. And I don't know how long I laid there. I feel like in my memory, it was hours. It could have been minutes. I don't know. I was a kid. But then the man turns, and I always thought this was so odd too, because he didn't just poof disappear. He physically left the room. And he would physically, I don't know if he physically entered the room, because I kind of woke up and he was already there. But when he turned to leave, it was like he turned to walk back towards my door. He didn't make it to the door. He didn't walk through the door. It's like he disappeared before he actually reached it, but it was like he was still exiting. Well, I saw him that night.
Right.
As soon as he left the room, I could move. I'm gone. Okay. Shooting in my mama's room, something tried to get me. It was bad. I'm not playing, and it happened again. And exact same thing. And I felt like the second time that I could feel him before I woke up. Like I was already frozen when I woke up. Same thing. And then he turned to leave and I could go. After that, my mom was like, enough is enough. Okay. And so she had one of her psychic friends come over and cleanse our house. And I remember her asking me a lot of questions, but I don't remember a lot of it anymore. One of her friends made me a dream catcher and we hung it from the light that was like right where he would stand, which was always at the foot of my bed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was woven with like turquoise and crystals to like kind of make an energy web of good energy around my bed.
Right.
You know, my mom did put the 4 crystals at the 4 corners of your bed to make this like grid to keep things away. And it never happened again. But I have never forgotten that. And it was always like, and I called him the bad man. Like, Mom, the bad man's going to come back. Like, the bad man was there. You know, and she'd be like, what does the bad man look like? I don't know. You know, he's a shadow and he has a hat. That's all I know. And so, yeah, that was my hatman experience.
That is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
It was
especially
terrifying.
For a small kid.
Yeah.
So since I pried that one out of you, I'll tell you mine.
Yes, please do.
So when I was 17, we lived out at Lake Charles State Park. That's where I grew up at. And the house that we lived in was a split level. Well, as I became a teenager, I got to take over the whole basement level to myself. And I had my room down there. And of course, as any teenager who doesn't need to be trusted, I was sneaking out at night. And I was going up to my girlfriend's house, who happens to be my wife that I am still married to 35 years later.
So it was for good reason.
And so exactly. At very least, I thought it was really good reason at the time whenever I was a teenage boy. But anyway, you need to know that so I can tell you this. So I woke up in the middle of the night from having a nightmare where this tall, I mean like 12, 20 foot tall shadow being with a hat, broad hat on his head, kind of like, always remind me of the Quaker Oat Man. I don't know why. But anyway, he was chasing me everywhere I went. So I woke up absolutely mortified. I mean, I was cold sweats, the whole 9 yards. And any other time I would have been terrified. I was like you. I was terrified of the dark when I was a kid. And I think that has to do with being connected to the things that are going on. I think I've seen more often than not kids who are absolutely terrified of the dark end up being adults who are a little bit more
sensitive.
I guess connected
like open,
is
yeah.
about the only phrase. Yeah, sensitive. Yep. So generally I would have been, just covered up in the sheets and the blankets and hope that would have protected me from anything until morning, even at the age of 17. But for some reason I had this overwhelming fear that something was going to happen to my girlfriend, Michelle, my wife. I threw on my shoes, slid out that back door, and started to haul ass. And there was a big field that had a security light on one side, and I had to tie my shoe right there. So I stopped to tie my shoe, and this massive shadow passed over me. I have never made that run to her house that fast in, my entire life. I could have outrun any track and field star because I was scared to death for myself, for her, for everything, And so yeah, that was my hatman thing. And that happened way back in, oh Lord, I think that was back in 86, 87.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I guess this happened. Well, I don't know how old I was. Well, I was born in 87. So had to be the 90s.
Yeah.
That I ran into the hatman.
So it wasn't really till like the late 90s to the early 2000s where they started really discussing shadow people and hatmen and stuff like that. So
yeah, and there's been a lot of theories now, especially as I feel like the internet started telling each other, like, hey, I've experienced this too, of what makes some people experience the hatman. And there's a theory out there that like the kids that he appears to kids that are, traumatized in some way or that are abused or whatever. But that's absolutely not the case for me. You know, I had a fantastic childhood. I wasn't a sad child. I didn't have any of that. But if we take the Walking Sam legend into account, just, you know, in theory, and he's kind of a spirit of sadness, of like depression. He goes after people with depression. I have wondered now if it's not being drawn to like the negative emotion in a space. So I don't have depression. I wasn't a depressed child, but my dad suffered from depression.
Right.
So if the hatman or the shadow people are attracted to negative emotion or negative energy, that would kind of explain why they're in any given space. And I guess because of the area I'm in, there's a lot of people in my town that have certain addiction problems.
Correct.
And those people, there's a, you know, with one certain one, I'm sure you can guess which substance I'm talking about here, but they see the shadow people and they all see it. Like, you can talk to any of them and you can ask, and they're very open. Like, yes, I've seen the shadow people. They were under my house. They were watching me in the yard. They were in the trees. They were climbing up, you know, trying to climb inside my windows. And I always thought, like, how crazy is that they all experience the same thing? Well, the more I would hear about it, the more I'm like, you know what? What is the odds of, I understand that substances can alter your brain chemistry and make people hallucinate or whatever. But what are the odds that they're all seeing the exact same thing?
Right.
You know, I think it's possible that the substance is altering their brain enough to perceive something that is actually there that we just don't normally perceive because they're a part of their neurons are firing in a way that they're normally not.
Yep.
And it could be too that the shadow people are attracted to them because if it is negative emotion, negative experiences, well, a lot of people trapped in addiction get into this cycle of guilt and shame and of doing things that they know were wrong, but they do it anyway. It's negative emotion, negative experience. It would draw them in. And then they can actually see them too, which is terrifying. But yeah, I think it could be. I think the shadow people is something real.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Oh, let's see. So we talked about Walking Sam. We talked about Places of Power, the mimics, the doppelgangers. What else do you find in this world of monsters interest you?
All of them, really. Like I'm actually very fond of Bigfoot. I think only because he's the most common of the cryptids, the first cryptid I ever, you know, knew of, and because you can't tell me Bigfoot's not real. You know what I mean? Like, in some way or another, I don't know what Bigfoot is, but come on now. Like, he's everywhere, all across the world, all across it. Bigfoot's real. I just don't know, you know, none of us know what Bigfoot is or how many big feet there are. I really don't know the plural of Bigfoot. Would it just be Bigfoot?
Oddly enough, it's Bigfoots.
Bigfoot? I would have never guessed that.
That's why I always stick with the term Sasquatch. I always feel funny saying Bigfoots, but I can say Sasquatches and I feel a little bit normal.
Doesn't sound so silly. I think all of them are really interesting. I think the dogman phenomenon is really interesting. I think cryptids in general are a group that is very fascinating because you have the two different opinions on almost all of them of whether or not it is flesh and blood or something supernatural. And nobody knows, you know, no one knows what it is. Obviously, some cryptids, we're going to call it that, but are more not really cryptids as much as they are like others, as you would say, like maybe some form, like the Leshy was forest. They're actually forest spirits. They wouldn't be a cryptid, but they're classified as cryptids nowadays.
Yeah. My background is in cryptozoology, where I worked with cryptozoology.com for several years, and I was a writer on there, investigator. My original investigations were into North American black panthers.
Okay.
And so if you can actually, you know, toot my own horn here, you can actually look up my name and North American black panther, and I'm the one that gave him the name NABP.
That's so cool. I did not know that.
Yeah. And then I kind of took a little bit of a break from some of that for a little while, but then I've come back and everything. But yeah, originally in cryptozoology, anything that we studied was an actual flesh and blood animal. It had no paranormalness to it. Now a lot of times what we call cryptids is anything from a flesh and blood animal through something that has a certain paranormal side to it. So it's, it drives the old cryptozoologists crazy, but they're having to open up to the idea, because a lot of what happens with Bigfoot happens, and we have orbs, we have trackways that will disappear or reappear, or we have Bigfoot dashes behind a tree and nobody has any idea where he went. He's just suddenly gone.
Disappears.
Exactly. So, I think we need to open our minds up a little bit more a while back, but still be pretty guarded about what we buy into.
Right. Like the ability to, look at things objectively in the spirit of wanting to learn, and even if you don't completely buy it, still hold it up and give it a proper examination.
Exactly. I'm one of those that's more about collecting the stories, collecting the evidence, and trying to find out what the common denominators are there, so I can actually come to an answer. I think a lot of our cryptozoologists, our paranormal researchers and stuff like that in the past have been guilty of coming up with very odd speculative theories that have no evidence to back them up, and then they get really cranky whenever you try and make them prove what they're talking about. Right. And I think we've done a disservice to the next generation of researchers by not actually handing them something to say, okay, this is what we've learned so far. Now you take it and you find the next step, because we haven't given them anything to work with. If anything, we blurred the line so bad that, we'll be lucky if there is a next generation that actually cares about it.
I'd like to hope there will be. The only thing I worry about is our internet or our grid getting wiped out, and then all of our documents and our newspaper articles and everything will go down with the ship. It was so silly to go full digital with all the archives and the people don't even buy books anymore. That makes me so sad. I love a good book. Don't you want to smell it? Hold the actual book.
Yep. That's why I wrote a book, because
your book is fantastic. I love it. I thought it was so well written. I love that there's illustrations to show what the common idea is.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was all about having a little bit of fun and getting the first book out there. And I wanted it to be something that people could use out in the field if they wanted to. It wouldn't just be something they'd set on the shelf. I wanted people to think. I wanted to hand you something and you go, okay, well, that sounds cool. Or you could go, this guy's an idiot and I'm going to go prove him wrong. Either way, I got you in the field. So,
exactly.
I noticed lately a lot of your TikToks have more to do with history. What's going on with more history than the crazy stuff?
I think I just go through phases where I'm a big history buff anyway. I've always I feel like I've had so many interests and hobbies over time that it's ridiculous trying to explain them all. But in my brain, there's not always a noticeable connection, but there is always a connection. So I've had so many different hobbies and things that I've dove into, but in my brain, they connect a little bit. So I got into history forever ago. When I went to college for a few years. I did not graduate college, but I went for a few years, and I was going to be a history major at first. And then I switched that to journalism. And then I switched that to not going to college anymore. But history has always been a big deal to me. I think that the past is super important and that we shouldn't forget it. And that's one of the reasons I love the stories too. I think it was actually an appreciation for history that led me, as much as it was wanting to collect where strange places could be. It was also a sense of the stories are going to be forgotten one day if we don't keep telling them. It's such a small one. It's a local legend about some lost silver mine that's not far from my house. Supposedly that was, and this was a big legend when my mom and my uncle were young. Everybody talked about this lost mine. Nobody remembers it anymore. My uncle, because he got obsessed with these old treasure legends, he told me about it. So I remember it. And so I've told people, but I'm it's that sense of, if we don't keep telling them, they'll be forgotten. Will the next generation even remember that everybody went out looking for this lost silver mine in Crystal Hill? Probably not, if nobody tells the story. So then I was like, you know what? Let me start collecting them, all the stories. I want all the stories from everywhere, and we're all going to tell them to each other so that nobody ever forgets them. So I just go through random kicks where I just get interested in some. Like there for a while, I went through a big Bigfoot moment where I told a bunch of Bigfoot stories in a row. And then all of a sudden I'm off somewhere else because something else caught my attention.
I can understand that.
I always circle back though to the same things eventually.
Well, I know that everybody enjoys your TikToks. Everybody I've ever talked to who knows who you are, and quite a few of them do, they all enjoy your TikTok. They're always like, hey, that's that girl that says you want to hear a story.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I started doing that. It was such a silly thing of just like, hey guys, y'all want to hear another story? Y'all want to hear a story? It just kind of stuck.
I like it. It's a good catchphrase. I hope you keep doing it, and I hope you keep on making your TikToks. And you're getting ready to start helping somebody with a podcast, aren't you?
Yes. My friend Steve, he's actually he started out my mom's friend. She knew him from the psychic fairs that I grew up at, which, by the way, Helena was her name, the lady who did the psychic fairs, and she still does them at the North Little Rock Community Center a couple of times a year. And they're really fun. So if anybody's into that, y'all can check that out. But yeah, Steve was my mom's friend from the fairs way back in the day. So he's been a family friend for always. Mm-hmm. And he is how does he word it? A shamanic practitioner. And so he's a shaman, but he also incorporates like modern techniques and modern belief systems. And his big thing is like blurring the lines that divide us when it comes to learning about spiritual things or anything. Mm-hmm. And so he is starting a podcast called Simpatico Blurring Lines. And I'm going to be a co-host on there along with Sarah Martucci. I think that's how I say her last name. Sorry, Sarah, if I said it wrong. I think Sarah Martucci and Rebecca. And we all have different backgrounds. We all have different, I guess, expertises or specialties. Mm-hmm. And we'll just be discussing random things and, talking about it, the four of us, to compare viewpoints or whatever. I don't know. I think it'll be fun. We've only recorded one episode so far, and it's still being edited, but I think we'll have a good time with it.
It sounds like it's going to be great. I know at some point in the future, I intend to do like a roundtable talk with a couple of different people. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that because I like to hear what everybody else has to say on subjects.
Me
because
too.
If you stick with, and I find I run into this all the time on the group, I feel like I'm about this far from making it all about me and what I think, because I'm always writing entries and stuff in there. I want everybody else to get involved. And it's hard to get people to get involved in stuff like that. It's you get generally a lot of people who want to read stories, listen to stories, hear other people's experiences, and they don't really get that involved. And I'm more of the old style, everybody's voice needs to matter and they need to speak up. So I like to get everybody involved in it. And like I posted on there before, don't be afraid to be wrong. I've been wrong far more than I've ever been right, so, but
I think that's what stops people too, is that like fear of, well, there's people that know more than me here. I don't want to look stupid, or I don't want to sound ridiculous, or I don't want, people to think I'm crazy, when like, you can tell us here, guys, like, this is a safe place.
Yep, exactly. It is a safe place. And we do have people who are quote unquote experts in a field, but I've been doing this for over 20 something years, especially when you get into cryptozoology and the paranormal. I'm no expert. There's no experts in that,
There's always more to learn.
Oh yeah. If I'm an expert, I'm the guy that's sitting in the dark with a candle telling you how bright it is out here. It just doesn't make any sense. So we're all learning from one another. And I've learned more from kids asking me questions. Well, okay, if that's such a thing, then why not this? And I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. I didn't think about that.
Yes. Sometimes people can really like alter the way you see things or the way you understand things and not even realize that they did it. Like, that's why I think open discussion with people is so important, because it really makes a difference sometimes, being able to hear other opinions and different points of view, because otherwise you're just kind of talking into an echo chamber if you're only ever talking to people that agree with you.
Exactly. And half the time, about 6 months later, I won't even agree with me. I'll be like, "What?"
Right. I'm always changing my mind. I swear. As we're learning and growing. Like, I love to learn. I love that people give me so many stories for me to learn about that I wouldn't know otherwise, because I love to learn new things. I love to hear new stories. I love to hear new perspectives. Like, I eat it up. I want to hear everybody's opinion on everything.
Two subjects that have been super popular. I'll go ahead and I'll say three subjects that have been super popular over the past few years. And Ryan and I discussed them pretty in-depthly on the last show. And those are the Dogman, the Wendigo, and the Skinwalker. Now,
the Skinwalkers are everywhere.
Yeah, he's really deep into the Skinwalker stuff. What is your feeling on the Skinwalker?
I think that definitely has become a ginormous internet catch-all phrase. It's become the hot topic. It's become the trendy thing to say. And no matter what people are talking about, someone in every single comment section, no matter what you're talking about, no matter whose it is, not just mine, not just y'all, just everyone across the board, someone is going to say Skinwalker every time without fail, because I think it's become a catch-all for shapeshifter or even any cryptid. Literally anything that is outside their normal grasp of what it could be, they're going to say Skinwalker. And I think that's just internet. I don't even know the word I'm looking for. I don't want to say nonsense, because y'all's opinions are valid, but you're wrong. It's not Skinwalkers.
I think I would have to. Nobody's going to like what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it this way anyway. I think it has to do with internet ignorance. I think it has to do with, well, Billy Bob said it was because,
it's the parroting effect. It is. Yes. I think it's just repeating each other without actually looking into it or knowing what it is, because the real lore of Skinwalkers is very different. And I actually know a guy that is Navajo, and he was willing to talk to me about it one day, because I was like, listen, I know this is not your favorite thing to talk about, but can we please, I just got a couple of questions. And he humored me and said that Skinwalkers are not really that common anymore, from what I understand, from what he explained to me. They still exist, but there was something that happened, and I can't remember what they called it. I guess it was some kind of war. I don't really know. There was something that wiped out some Skinwalkers.
Yep.
Apparently. And there's just not a lot left anymore. And the chances of actually like running into one past the Midwest is so slim. Like, it's just not their area. It's just not where they would be.
Right.
Because they're not actually cryptids. They're human beings.
Exactly.
That became supernatural by their own choices and their own actions. Right.
So, Wendigo. How do you feel about the Wendigo?
I actually don't know that much about the Wendigo enough to have. I feel like it's like, if the Skinwalkers had a BFF, it would be the Wendigo, okay? Because everybody thinks they're doing everything together. They're like, that is the most common thing for people to say. I do know they're supposed to be more like ghoul-like, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I don't want to say goblin, because it wouldn't be small goblin. Is it ghoul? Right. It's like a starved gray human that's. Yeah, I don't know that much about the Wendigos, honestly, but I think that those also are a much more West thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not likely to run into one in Arkansas. Like,
yeah.
Like I did the one story I think I talked to you about the guy that thought he saw a Wendigo.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting only because, well, he just latched on to whatever it was, the first word he ran into, the one that he was like, well, that sounds like it could be it. So it's got to be the Wendigo.
Right.
I think he just experienced something strange. I still, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a Wendigo. But I think that's also like the Skinwalkers. It's become a catch-all for something they can't explain.
Well, typically, if you get into the lore of the Wendigo, they come from the Algonquins and the Ottawa up in Canada. So it's going to be more northerly than your.
Yeah, because they're a cold spirit.
Exactly. They are a winter spirit. They're the, think of them. I hate the word demon, but think of the word, think of demon of the winter and of starvation and things like that.
Right. Yeah, because I know it's supposed to look sick and starving.
Yeah, and I think
there's a lot of people have like horns on it, put horns on them, but I don't think that's accurate.
No, not even vaguely close.
Yeah,
I think that for the most part, Ryan actually touched on that. It had to do with a piece of artwork an illustration that somebody had done, and then they just blew it out of proportion with Hollywood movies. And oh well, if you stick antlers on this thing, it's going to look even cooler and even more
Right.
terrifying. But I think it probably has more in line with what we call the pale crawler.
Yeah, and is the pale crawler also the rakes?
They're very close. The rake, of course, is a creepy pasta, just like Slender Man, just like
Okay,
what
okay.
is it, Jeff the Killer and stuff like that. But I think it derived from the idea of the pale crawler.
Yeah, because I've also heard that one, not a lot, but here and there, and I'm like, I'm not actually familiar with a rake, so I can't even tell you what they are. But I think the way people are using it is they're probably referring to the pale crawlers.
I think they are too. I think
Yeah.
they are too. And, whenever we run into people like that, we got to be careful that we don't. I've seen it a couple of times where people kind of go off on somebody because they say it's a rake, and then somebody else will be like, well, it can't be a rake because rakes aren't real.
Right.
That's the name that people
Yeah, if that's the way they
associate that
understand
with.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just, be educational and not mean. We don't have
Right.
to
Or,
say,
and
well,
I don't get nitpicky with people. I don't really care what you call things as long as I'm understanding what you're talking about. You can go right back to calling it whatever. I just want to make sure I understand what you're
right,
saying.
right, exactly. Okay, so the last one, Dogman. What do you think of Dogman?
Dogman, I had heard of Dogman before, but you taught me more about Dogman than I ever knew on my own. I always thought that Dogman was just a weird way of saying werewolf. I
Mm-hmm.
thought people were just being cute. When they were like, "Oh, the dog man," I'm like, "The werewolf." Okay, like Bigfoot and Sasquatch. For a long time, I thought it was the exact same thing,
Right.
and turns out it's not. I know better now. I've learned a lot about it now, but I still do think that Dogman and werewolves and all of the canine type creatures are
Mm-hmm.
probably all the same entity. They're probably all like or related to the same entity.
I lean toward that too. I really do. I lean towards that. Yeah, it's kind of funny because the name werewolf simply means man wolf.
Yeah.
So if you look at dog man, it's the same thing. It's just two different words that mean the
Right.
exact
That's why I
same
always
thing.
thought it was like Bigfoot and
So
Sasquatch. It was just
yeah,
the new cutesy name for werewolf.
exactly. And I will tell you right now, I absolutely hate the name Dogman. I think it is the worst name for. I'm like that took the least creativity out of anybody to
Right.
come up with.
Kind of like Bigfoot.
Yeah, yeah. I think we could have done better, and I wish somebody would come. Like I think it's in the Appalachians. They call them grave diggers.
I didn't know that. That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a couple of other ones. I can't think of them right off the top of my head. I'm actually compiling information on Dogman right now for the North American Dogman Project because I'm building a profile on the animals so that we are entity, whatever you want to call it, so that it's a little easier to try and figure out the common denominators. And can we see that it's going to appear here, or should it appear there? What are we looking for when we're doing research and investigations?
Right.
So
What
which
do
I
you
think is
actually
important.
do in the association? Do you go out and do the actual on the ground investigations to look for Dogman?
I am a researcher and an investigator. So if somebody reports in to my boss in that, whatever you want to call him, report into him, okay, such and such saw something over in Sharp County. Well, I'm going to get my stuff together. I'm going to go over to Sharp County. I'm going to investigate. I'm going to collect information, evidence, whatever it is. And then I just compile that and turn it in.
That's so fun. So
Yep.
have any of y'all actually ever caught like hardcore evidence?
I haven't yet. This being an investigator with them is a new thing. So as far as hardcore evidence on that subject with them, no, I haven't. I've had what I believe is a run-in with possibly a dog man in my area, but it
In your
was,
area?
yes, in my area, but it was much more in passing than anything else. Um,
Let's hear it.
there's,
Let's hear it.
yeah,
Yeah. Tell me
I'm
about it. I
gonna.
want to hear about it.
There's an area up here. There's a small town named Maynard, and that's close around there is where I go do some deer hunting, or I did anyway. We also did some bushcrafting up there for a while. Me and my son Paul, who you've spoken to before, we did some bushcrafting up that way. So one day I was up there by myself, and I was getting everything, putting it back in the truck. I'd been building some kind of structure or something like that, and I hear what sounds something like a cross between something mechanical and a hyena back in the woods behind me, probably no more than 200 yards. And it just made the hair on the back of my neck, when I had hair on the back of my neck, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I was like, that's not right. Now, I do know that there's a lumber yard not that far away. So I automatically thought that was the forklift or something over there. So I stood there and I just watched and listened, because I know the way echoes work in the woods. And it did it again, and it wasn't anything I could identify. And something in my brain just told me, make a big loud grunt and it'll scare this thing off. And I did it as much as I could possibly think what Bigfoot would sound like, I guess.
Yeah.
A big grunt. And sure enough, this thing, I could hear it run off way off in the woods. But I never saw it.
Mm.
So the second time was all three of these things happened in the exact same spot. The second one, Paul and I were out there working on a structure, got done, putting stuff in the truck, and then just this overwhelming smell all of a sudden of like when a dog or a coyote goes to the bathroom.
Mm.
I mean, just hit us full force. And I was like, oh my God, what is that? And he had the same reaction. And all of a sudden it was gone. I mean, just like it hit us like a wave and then it was gone. And that doesn't happen. Smells don't work like that. They'll either ease in or they'll move away. There was no breeze. There was nothing to blow it at us. It just all of a sudden was there and then all of a sudden was gone. The third one was in the exact same area. I was in a tree stand, and it was probably late October, and I was waiting on the deer to show up. It was getting late in the afternoon, and I happened to see out of the corner of my eye behind a cedar tree a large shadow. And as I turned my head to look, it took off. But it had to have been at least 8 foot tall, whatever it was. But it was just this big shadow, and it just took off whenever I looked. Yeah.
So the smell is something that's pretty common across, well, Bigfoot and Dogman sightings, and a lot of other ones.
Exactly.
I wonder what the smell actually comes from. Is it because they're in the woods and they're stinky?
I don't know.
Or could it be like a skunk thing where it spits off a smell as like a defense or like a marking of like, I'm here, get away?
That's possible, but we run into the same thing also with paranormal stuff with ghosts, where people may run into, the smell of a rotting corpse or something like that.
Or the sulfur smell. That's really common.
Yeah. The Joshua Cutchins has a really good book on that. Trying to think of the name of it. I'll have to look it up. I'll post it on the group, but it has to do with the smells that are accompanied with things like the paranormal. And it's definitely a good read. I recommend him as an author anyway. He really knows his stuff. He does good work.
Yeah, definitely post it, because I want to read everything. It bums me out that human life isn't long enough for us to read all the books in the world.
Yeah.
Like, what a crappy deal.
Have you ever read Where the Footprints End? Or it's Where the Footprints End. It's Josh Cutchins and Renner. I can't remember his first name. But there's a volume 1 and a volume 2, and it has to do with Sasquatch, aliens, ghosts, the Fae, all of that stuff.
No, I'm have to write it. I'm gonna have to look those up.
Yes. Look them up on Amazon. They're definitely worth the read. Definitely worth the read.
I got such a long book list on Amazon at this point, because everyone I hear about, I'm like, I need this one, this one, this one. I still haven't even read the Mothman prophecies, and I want to read it so bad.
Yep.
I think Mothman's a very interesting one too.
I
There's
think
so
so
many
too.
books.
Yep. I got a few books by John Keel, and
Yeah.
I really liked his outlook later on a lot of those subjects where he was like, this is all coming from something common, something
Yes.
one source.
And all three of us agree with that
Yes.
because I definitely think that it all ties back to the same something.
Yes, I agree. I agree. We just don't know what it is.
Yeah. What is
But
the something is the question.
the funny thing is, I think the answer is right in front of us, but we just don't know how to see it.
Yes, I agree with that completely because I think that's one of the things that's always some things make my brain itch. And I don't know how else to explain that of when just creeps into and it hits just the right way. And I'm like, oh, it's making my brain itch. So I know it's an important something. And it's always felt like it was right there. Like if we could just, like one of those, have you ever seen the puzzles where you have to like unfocus your eyes and a 3D image will show up out of the static? Like
Yep.
that. Like if we could just adjust something small, it would be right there. We could see it.
Yep. I just keep waiting to have that one epiphany that'll just hit me all of a sudden in
Right.
the middle of the day, and I'll be like, holy shit, that's what
Yes.
it was.
And that's the way it works sometimes. Those little epiphanies have connected so many dots for me over time of literally just walking and being like, hold up. Suddenly two different ideas just met in my brain.
Mm-hmm. So what's going on besides the podcast thing in your future?
I don't really know. I'm waiting to find out if TikTok's going to be banned.
Yeah.
Hopefully not. I really hope something happens to make it stay. I think that it will stay. I don't think it will actually be taken away, but you never know. They could do it. I moved over to YouTube a little bit. I'm not great at it because it is a completely different deal than TikTok. And for being a content creator, I am actually not very good with technology at all. It's pretty hard for me to learn new ways of doing this. So, but I am trying to get better about YouTube. So I'm trying to start making videos for that platform. And then I got the podcast I'll be on with Steve. And I don't know. We'll see where else, where life takes me because I haven't planned out any of this. Everything just keeps happening. So I'm just going to keep going with it.
Well, if you end up needing any help with any of the YouTube stuff, you can ask me. You can always get a hold of me on the group. If I can't figure it out, I know Paul can. So he's my techie guy. So
my sister is my techie girl because I have to call her to do the most basic things. Like, please tell me how to work this printer. But she knows. She's helpful, but she doesn't know YouTube. So I will definitely let you know if I need help with that because she is not a content creator. She doesn't post a lot of stuff. So she can help me with computers, but she cannot help me with the channel.
Right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up there unless you've got anything else that you want to let anybody know. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on and hanging out with me. And we're going to make sure that we promote your TikTok, your YouTube, your podcast that you're going to be on, and anything else that you do, because that's what our community is about. It's about helping one another out with all that stuff. So hang around for just a few minutes and I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the show.
Okay, great.
If you're a listener and you're watching this on YouTube, if you would please subscribe, hit the like button, subscribe with us, turn on your notifications. We want to have you as part of the group. We want to have you hang out with us and be there for every episode that comes up. If you're interested in the kind of subjects that we talk about and you want to hang out with Amber and you want to hang out with me and some of the other fun people that we talk about, you can find us on Facebook. Go to groups and look for Monstrous and you will find us. Come in, hang out with us. All right. Had a great time, Amber. And
me too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll bring you back in the future.
Yeah, I would love to. I had a great time.
We did too. All right. Goodbye.
All right, bye.